The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the host and co-chair of this webinar. My name is Karen Mann, and I'm here today with my co-chair, Sidita Hasi, who is also our speaker of the day. So we represent Human Development and Leadership Division of the American Society for Quality. This is a global division aiming to enrich the personal and professional lives of our members and non-members across the global community. We continuously look for new speakers within the range of our body of knowledge, which can be found in MyASQ HD&L community site. We host monthly webinars, so if you are interested or you know someone who is interested, we would love to have a chat and review their application and if they meet our criteria. Before we begin the webinar, let me go over some webinar rules. If there is any question or comment, please type under the question tab and we will answer the questions. The webinar will be held for 45 minutes and then Q&A is held for 15 minutes. Those who attend for 40 minutes will receive zero point 0.1 CEU through an email which you can save and use to claim your credit with ASQ. So today we're delighted to introduce to you to our speaker, Sidita Hasi. Sidita Hasi is a project management and continuous improvement professional, leadership coach, mentor, and speaker, awarded for going above and beyond across top 100 Fortune companies with 10 years in Italy, 10 years in USA, and now she's in our home country, Albania. She's a certified Six Sigma Green Belt and a certified Scrum Master and holds a Master of Organizational Leadership, MIT Sloan Executive Education and Management and Leadership, a Bachelor in Financial Economics from Italy, along with extra professional certifications which resemble her strong belief in lifelong learning. Sidita contributes to the American Society for Quality through various leadership roles, such as her past role at ASQ Boston section as a program chair, annual quality conference co-chair, as well as continues to serve as a webinar co-chair for ASQ Human Development and Leadership Division, along with me, quarterly leadership newsletter articles writer, and also she's a mentor in the newly launched mentoring program. She strongly believes that quality belongs to everyone. Deming and her goal is to extend quality across organizations through leadership principles, continuous improvement mindset, and smart work methodologies. So with not delaying any further, Sidita, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, Kiran. It's always a pleasure collaborating here. Many of you know us from past webinars, so we're always intrigued by new topics, or when we see your feedback that you do require more time on a certain topic, we do provide that, so please keep that feedback coming. That's what we did with previous webinar on change management with Kiran, and those are available. So even though you had no chance to be on those live, you can always go back and listen to those. So this to link somehow what we'll be talking about, which is Agile today, it's very important to make sure that as the requirements change, we also change with those. So keep that feedback coming because we really appreciate that. I chose these three main quotes to represent a little bit more about me because they really drive me constantly. Deming's quote, "Quality belongs to everyone," is something I relate to very closely. In my previous 10 plus years of work experience, my attempt has always been to only basically share my motivation towards quality, but also inspire other advocates to do so. And that's what we try to do with these webinars. It is important to know that we need to create a quality of culture which goes across organizations, and it's not merely locked within quality department, which traditionally happens so. If we look at multiple industries, and we've had the chance to do that, not just where we have been working, but with other professionals in quality, you do find quite common that people are working in quality within those quality departments, and it's very challenging when you try to push it a little bit further and bring it across the organizations. And if we want to go agile, we need to cross that border. While working in Boston, my path towards quality was not random, neither was it expected because we did not have a quality department at that time. It all started with an inner desire I had to view things interconnected and help other departments benefit from shared work. This, along with a restless curiosity of why things were done a certain way and a bug of why don't they try something new, led to my role in project management and certification with ASQ. But the way I see this is because that at that time there was no quality department, so here I was certified, and as my former director would make fun of me in a nice way, he was saying I was entitled now to basically question how things were done because I was certified, right? So I was not anymore seen as a person who's just criticizing. So that was good. But as I said, there was no quality department. So, and as you know firsthand, you can't build a mountain yourself. And every leader needs a crowd. But I had a vision, and in that vision, I identified people I had been working with across other departments who share the same intrinsic motivation towards quality. And I'm actually happy to see that some of them, of those past co-workers, are still here in this webinar, so they could relate very closely to that. And they served as advocates. I started by training in quality, and it didn't take a long time until there were multiple people across the company now certified in quality, or at least had some basic understanding of what quality philosophy, tools, principles were. We gained momentum. And so much of it that this training basically was turned into a mandatory training for certain roles, into a volunteering sort of training for whoever was interested to participating in that. So while we did start a quality department, we also made sure that quality became part of the culture beyond that department. Why I'm saying all this? Because change and leadership are not just a pre-established process or a method you rigidly can follow. It all depends on circumstances. This also represents what agility is all about. You learn by doing and find solutions as you go, but you can't just press a button and pretend it's going to enlighten the organization somehow. In addition, I would say that the servant leadership of my also Albanian co-national beloved Mother Teresa is the leadership style that Agile embraces. But this, along with a constant dedication towards continuous improvement and learning, as per great Nelson Mandela, are key elements to keep developing what we should call a situational and adaptive leadership skills that this ever-changing world we're now at demands. I say this because I know firsthand that quality and leadership and change itself can drive us crazy. If you are truly passionate about it, as I am, chances are it will give you some insanity at times, and however, it will always bring you some joy and will never fail to fulfill you at all times. So let's just move on with having this in mind and see, let's pretend this is some sort of Agile in practice. So we're gonna shape this webinar in that way to kind of feel firsthand what it is about. So we will be addressing three main pillars, which we'll call a backlog. That's what in an Agile and Scrum framework actually it's called. And we will address here change, agility, and leadership. First, we will begin by focusing on change as a concept on its own. As humans, we tend to analyze the object of what's changing, but not so much, we don't focus so much on the change process itself. In this first section, we'll actually address how change itself is also changing throughout time. In the first part of the webinar, we'll actually understand agility and remove a little bit of ambiguity around it to see if there is any common understanding and make sure there is a common understanding before we move forward, and a clear basis which enables us to recognize which ways we can leverage and transfer its benefits. Whereas in the last part of this webinar, we will evaluate not only how can leadership benefit from Agile mindset, but what type of leadership skills we need to develop for a successful implementation of Agile transformation across these organizations. So let's begin. We'll take it one at a time. This is basically a to-do list, what some people might think, but it's a Kanban board. Some of you might have heard. It is used in Agile frameworks, and we'll move on that way, so it kind of helps us step by step moving forward. So we will be doing the evolution of change part, and we have on standby understanding agility and leadership through Agile lenses. So change. When we think of change, basically, what we usually think of is old versus new, moving from A to B. According to the dictionary, actually, I went on Google the other day and I just typed change. And change is about substituting or transforming the existing with the new. And if we left it alone, there will not be any change. The second one says that we transform or we convert, but what I liked seeing there was usually followed by into. What will that make you think? That let's keep an eye on that. So by reason these definitions, it basically feels that we already know what the new is, what point B is. But what if we don't know what that is? What if we start the process of change without having it all figured out? And what if there are multiple options out there, multiple perspectives? What if, let's say, point B changes and that happens quite, in a constant way? We will know the point B only when we get there. So this does sound very, very confusing and might really freeze leaders. Why leaders? We used to always talk a bit negatively about managers and saying leaders are great and all of that. But we will question a bit that mindset today, because as leaders, you are used to start with a clear vision in mind. We all talk about vision and leadership, right? They go hand in hand. And only later help followers jump on board. Today, we will actually stretch our leadership mindset. Why? Because we need to accept the fact that we do want change, even though we don't know what the outcome might look like just yet. At least in the agile mindset, that's what we need to stretch ourselves into thinking. This is why when we think of change now, we have to question ourselves, are we talking about evolution or are we talking about a revolution? What's going on with change? So before I sound way too philosophical here, let's look at a couple of examples of how the way we organize work actually has changed throughout the years. So we shifted from what we call a vertical hierarchy with knowledge workers seated in cubicles with some in person or maybe sometimes call meetings, to multiple ways of working that go from shared leadership, such as in Agile, which we'll be talking a bit more closely today, email communications to get the work done, meetings with members attending virtually or not virtually, depending on the situation, to those who work from home or even vacation spots. So how cool is that, right? So just think of the fact that right now I'm actually in Hawaii as I speak. Well, that's a bit of wishful thinking out there. I wish that happened, but it's not. But you get the point. So this is to say that the work or the way we work actually in time moved not simply from A to B, so it gave us all the time to adapt to that and change management and all those cool theories about change management, but moved from A to B, C, D, E all at once. While it first started moving from one way of working to another, it has now gone very, very quickly to the level of multiple coexisting realities of working styles. The same happened in technology, if we think about it, which has been revolutionizing not only the product we receive, but also the way we build them, the way we get them at a very exponential rate. This is to say that change itself is happening at a faster rate and is in a more diverse way. So how do we as leaders keep up with it? And this is where Agile helps, and this is why we're actually today here and discussing about it. So as we discussed change, we update our backlog. And that's what happens in Agile frameworks as well. So we know what we did, what we're going to do, and what's left. So what we're going to do right now is just share that understanding of agility and see if there is any common ground, how much we need to go in depth, so we create that common ground. So I think there is a poll, Kieran, about this. Let's just see actually from the audience, how many people have heard about agility, how many had some experience with it, or some are actually gurus about agility. So let's see based on their experience, and if you can launch the first poll, I think you should show.
The poll has been
open. An idea, so we know.
Poll has been opened, so please go ahead and make a selection based on your professional experience with the Agile and never heard of it, or you have heard of it but didn't work with it, or you have some basic experience, or the last one is I'm an Agile nerd.
So this will actually help us understand how to move forward with the webinar. we're trying to implement agility as we speak with this webinar too. So depending on the level of depth that you have on agility, we will shape how we move forward. So it is important that you reply to that. You can click if you are on a computer or phone without.
Can I give another 10 seconds? So if anybody
Yeah.
has not voted, please go ahead. I'm just looking at the numbers and I can see that another 10% haven't voted yet. So please go ahead and make a selection so that we can get a clear picture of your level of.
And you don't need to be exact, so that whichever you feel more connected to. You might have heard of it, but you didn't really understand it, so that's fine too. So whatever you feel more connected to from those choices.
Okay, so I am going to go ahead and close the poll in next 3 seconds. And there you go. And so, Sidita, the poll outcome is that we have 21% that have never heard of it. And
Okay.
the highest is number 2, 48% that have heard about it but have never worked with it. And then we have 29% with basic experience with it. And we have 2% agile nerds in the group.
Okay, so the 2% can actually go online right now. We'll give the slides to them and they can lead us the way, because I am not in the 2%, even though you might feel like I'm the guru here. So, and the reason we do this is because we really want to collaborate with one another. So it is interesting to have a mix of people with different experiences. So anything you have to share, Karen mentioned before the question box, you can use that for comments too. So wherever you feel like you want to add your experience, or you have a question coming or something to point out, go slower, go faster, anything like that, just keep it coming. So we'll have Karen as a Scrum Master here. So she's not going to interrupt me, but she's going to find the time and when to do that. So don't feel like you're going to screw up the webinar here. Just go with it. Okay, so with that in mind, let's just don't go over too much of the details, but we do have a 20% that have no understanding of Agile. So it is important we mentioned and we emphasize certain items when we think about agility. So Agile started from a group of about 17 software developers, if I'm not wrong, in 2001 as a reaction that they had to the traditional, what they call waterfall development. It's just a framework there. They will share that as well. But it was perceived as slow, as dysfunctional. They formed what's called the Agile Manifesto. For those 21% that never heard of it, or even the 48% had some experience, maybe through other teams or other Scrum Masters there. You can read it. It's not long. It will give a very clear understanding of what it is. We will use some of that basis today. It's online, free, and open to everybody. So it is made of values, principles, and methodologies. The 4 Agile values there serve as a foundation of the Agile philosophy itself, because it is a philosophy at the end of the day. There are 12 principles which embody the values and provide a little bit more detail, so there are more concrete examples of what Agile means at a very lower level, so more easy to understand. And methods that support Agile values and principles are multiple out there. We will refer a little bit today about Scrum and XP, etc., but there are many, so keep that in mind. So in this case, we'll focus a bit more on the Scrum, so just to get an idea without being too detailed, but always leading it towards what our goal is, which are the leadership skills. So we'll focus a bit more on the people side of it rather than the framework itself. But there are multiple frameworks, as I said, so, and one of them is Scrum. Just to get the idea of the leadership traits needed to successfully implement such framework, let's go over the basics of it. Scrum terminology originates from actually a rugby game where self-directed formations advance in multiple incremental and team-based efforts from one sprint to another sprint. The first time I experienced actually this game was very back in the days when I was preparing my thesis for the leadership masters. And it was very interesting because I had for 3 months, consecutive months, I followed a rugby team based in Boston. to identify what leadership traits this sport was developing in its members. At that time, I had no clue about agility or anything like that. That was the option I had as a team, so I just went with it. But I noticed that they were very successful careers, these people, so I was kind of interested to see how this game was impacting their leadership traits. Let me say that the first few times that I saw the game, I was feeling like I'm watching a war where the opposites at the end of the game were going on Drickamp and loving each other, and they have no rules. That's what I felt, at least, whatsoever, or at least that was my thinking initially. But of course, that changed. But still, it kept them moving forward and score. What also impressed me was the level of collaboration, motivation, hard work that these people had during the entire season. There were literally bones broken in front of me, and yet smiles. We had to send some people to the hospital, and these people were smiling, and associating such process and desire to get back to the field was impressive. While I didn't really learn or end up how to play and end up playing rugby itself, many times I found myself in the field, which was not normal, not normal for the game, not normal for the coach, anything like that. It was sometimes because I was like cheering up too much, or sometimes the leader in me, or I felt like I'm this great leader who wanted to rescue the team and go show the team how to grab the ball and score and just do it as I was supposed to show them, right? Which in agile teams, it's not what you do, since the teams are self-directed. So it's very interesting to see now and learn about agility and go back and find this casuality and review the whole game differently. So the Scrum team is based on 3 roles. There is the product owner, which is basically accountable, what you see here, product backlog. And they're accountable for the value delivered to the stakeholders. And the product backlog priorities and user stories itself, but the prioritization of those, it's under product owner accountability. The second role is the developers team, which includes a cross-functional team made of whatever subject matter expert is needed to get the work done. They're part of the team. They're a self-organized team, and they have the ownership, and that's what it makes it different from other type of leadership management in team management roles. They have the ownership to pick some of these product backlog items in what they call then sprint backlog items. So they decide which one they're going to be working on in the next sprint. The sprint lasts from 1 to maximum 4 weeks, and the team has the freedom, as I said, to decide on the how they're going. So they will go into details about the activities of all those items, and they will decide on how to do that without interruption from the outsiders. There might be interruptions, but somebody else has to take care of that, and that somebody else is a Scrum Master, which is the third role. But this team meets every day in the morning for about 15 to 20 minutes maximum to talk about how they contributed to the scope itself. It's not just like an update list there. Hey, good morning, I did this. No, how did they contribute to the scope of the sprint itself from the work that I did yesterday or as a team? It doesn't have to be one-on-one, each person or as a team, but they need to see the value update and what will they will be working on that day of the meeting, and if there are any impediments that will prevent their work from being done. And this is where the Scrum Master is also very key here. He's a facilitator. He's accountable to ensure the Scrum and Agile principles are implemented and are being followed, educated as well. And if there is any impediments, they'll be taken care of. So there are certifications about each of these roles, plenty out there, plenty of institutions who provide those. If you are interested in this and you want to kind of go deeper, tons of information out there online. We can reach out and I can give you more information about that. So here's a practical example. It's an easy way to show the difference between what I said before. They were not happy, the software developers, with waterfall. That's why they went through agile principles. While in waterfall, the customer gets access to the product only after all the pre-established requirements that they were done at the beginning are met. Whereas in the agile context, there are multiple releases of incremental product throughout time with working functions. So you can really actually sell that product, which serve as a feedback opportunity for future developments. So it is different from just a test phase in the waterfall. You can literally sell the product when you release it. So here we go. For people who have the 21% that has no understanding of agility, if there is one thing that I want you to take away from this webinar is the clear understanding that Agile is a philosophy. It's not the framework itself. is a philosophy composed of a set of values and principles, so not the methodology on its own. As we know, values are key to change management itself and take really a lot of time to be instilled throughout an organization. So we have to make sure that people's values are actually in alignment with shared organizational values, and in this case with the agile mindset, prior to even trying to initiate the agile project, because that's what's actually happening and that's failing. Many companies are feeling like really cool about this agility, or they see it work somewhere else, they want to adapt it day one in their own organization, but the whole company is not ready. These values are not there, and they're not going to be instilled in a day. So an educational journey needs to be deployed prior to everything else, depending on the level of familiarity throughout the organization, especially the top management level if we're trying to deploy an agile transformation. So if we today went with the assumption that everybody knows about the values and everybody has practiced them and then excels in them, then we'll just be sharing a project on agility, and we'll just go with the methodology itself, which is implementing these values and principles. But knowing that there are people who don't have a clear understanding, who might need more time to practice those values and principles, we chose to actually focus on those first. So now let's move on and understand a bit more in detail these values, so we kind of get what leadership skills do we need. So the first value is based on the concept that Agile prioritizes individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We're so used to talk about process. If you have the right process, everything will be fine. So this is not to say that there are no processes and tools. And however, what's important here is the emphasis is put on self-directed and cross-functional teams, which enhance strong collaboration, problem solving, and innovative thinking, rather than simply complying to pre-established processes. So it is very key value, and it takes time to be adapted if the company is not working that way. We have another value here, which does seem, all these values actually feel very simple, yet when you go out there, you see that they fail so bad. So working software here is much more appreciated from a customer versus a comprehensive documentation. This, again, doesn't mean, because this is the confusion that I see in the companies and I've seen while I was working in Agile projects. So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't document work, but we should try to minimize it to the point it adds value and doesn't hinder team progress and adaptation to new changes. If we keep documenting everything, how are you going to keep up with it if it's changing so quickly? The new ISO, actually, the 9001, we'll talk about that as well, 2015 version, also recommends a reduction of documentation. Also, according to Ziv's law, the software development itself is unpredictable, and its documented artifacts such as specifications and requirements will never be fully understood. This means that whenever creating a new product, we can never be sure that all we need, context, specification, requirements, will be fixed, basically. All these things are subject to change. And it is very important also to remember that not all the products have this nature, and this is the confusion. Everybody now is going so fancy about agility that's literally losing their scope. So we have to make sure that it works for the product that we have. There are products out there, such as, I don't know, building a new building, for example, that do have rigid pre-established requirements, which are not subject to change. In this case, Agile is a waste of time. It's not the right setup for it. So don't just go out there and learn about Agile, get a certification, and then go and force into your company agility. You have to make sure that it works for the company you are at and the product and service you're providing. The next value we have here is customer collaboration. And this is the innovation part here. So having the customer all over the product development, over contract negotiation itself. So traditionally, the contract has been the core document, right, which enlists everything required by the customer. These documents entitled the customer to compare the value he was getting or perceiving in comparison to whatever was promised to him. And whatever was promised to him was where? In the contract itself. And the problem with that, though, the approach is that it doesn't allow for the customer collaboration throughout the product development, and doesn't allow for feedback and insights, and customer satisfaction is actually much higher. It's been proved when the customer is collaborating himself too. So responding to change over following plan as well is prioritized in agility. According to Humphrey's law, actually, this was very interesting when I read this. So users don't know what they want until they see a working product. Thus, change is to be expected from them. So traditionally, we speak a lot about change management and how to control change. However, agility is about embracing change and building resilience so that we don't avoid it when it happens. So we have to learn how to be resilient, not just to react to change itself or manage the change itself. About it. Microsoft, Apple, and many others out there prefer releasing incremental updates. It gives them more time to see if there is any feedback. So what we want also to avoid, and this is for a bit the one who have a bit of experience, who have seen this happening, maybe some of them, they share these myths. There is many out there. I just shows some that have experiences as well, and some that were shown there through other research. So is the idea that Agile is just for IT. We're not an IT company. That is wrong. That needs to go. It did start there. It's not true. Many companies, and there is proof of other companies who have implemented it. It's working, and you just have to make sure, as I said, that it's working for change requirements are actually changing frequently. There is actually a very great example there that I saw on TED Talk. One of the TED Talk speakers there, I think his name is Bruce Feiler, if I remember. He was actually showing how he implemented agility in his own family, where his own kids were waking up in the morning, having these Scrum meetings in the mornings, and they were accountable for doing their own chores. They were checking those checklist items, because we still like those. Even as adults or as kids, we love crossing out something that we've been doing. They're also doing weekly meetings that are showing what have we done right this week, what we could do better, and how can we improve, basically. So another myth here is the fact that there is no planning. That is not true. So it does feel like that. That's what I felt when I was watching that rugby game. Planning is ongoing in Agile versus taking place at the very start all at once. Another agility, as I mentioned before, documentation itself. There is documentation. I didn't say remove the documentation. I said reduce it. Rather than create a single lengthy document listing all project requirements, you just need to limit it to the user stories that are actually being worked at in the next 2-3 sprints. That's how much you actually plan, no more than that. Another myth, Agile works only for small projects. Well, even if you have big projects, it's always recommended that you split those projects in achievable small ones. So that is not the case with agility too. Another one, everyone has to attend the daily stand-up meetings. Well, that's true, but it doesn't really matter as long as they interact and they are even remotely interacting. And the fun part is there that even somebody who is attending remotely, they have to stand up too. So that's kind of very interesting, because it's the engagement. If you see me right now, I'm standing up because I want to be present. So I'm not just sitting there in my comfy chair and just like having this conversation, which can go so slow and then lose momentum. So it is important how this engagement is happening. And the last but not least, there's many out there. Again, you can read about those, are very funny, but you have to have some experience with it so you kind of get it. Otherwise, you'd feel like, okay, this is lessons learned, that's it. So while Agile, the final product remains unknown until the development is complete. Again, we spoke about small incremental working products, so it doesn't mean that the final product is not known. You just will have a little bit of piece at a time, so you will have a more complex product as you move forward. So what did we do now? So we just finished the understanding agility, and what we will be doing a little bit more in detail is the leadership through Agile lenses. So what can we get from Agile? What kind of leadership traits do we need to kind of exercise ourselves a little bit? So let's just look at the Agile principles, actually. As I previously mentioned, there are a set of values, 12 principles that agility mindset includes. So let's now look at how Agile principles are associated with leadership skills. And when I think about these 12 leadership skills, I kind of like grouping everything. I'm very visual, but at the same time, I want to see a logic between those those 12 principles. So I try to see if there is any patterns or any logical grouping. So what I came up with, it's what I would call, and we like to always have conversations about the why, the what, the when, and the how. So in the why portion, customer satisfaction is actually what matters, right? So, and Agile principles are based on the idea that the highest priority is to give satisfaction through early and continuous delivery of the working product. So that's why it's important to keep having these little deliverables, releases. And work is built around motivated and trustworthy individuals, even though it sounds very, simple, nice, cool, motivated people, yeah. This is key, actually, because if we have to form self-directing teams, they better be motivated and trustworthy. As a leader, all you need to provide is an environment and support that they need, and trust them to get the job done. Because you're not going to be, if you're the product owner, you're not going to be able to go out there and tell them how to do it and to change their work setting. Like, they have to do that themselves. There is no unique leader here. Right? Leadership here, which is different from what we think of leadership and what we're used to think of, is shared, and everyone works towards a common goal. So how many of you have watched, I don't know, I've recently watched that, even though it's an old movie, 8 Below. It's based on a true story about 8 dogs, sled dogs, are left in the Arctic's cold. And if you have seen it, you might recall how friendship, commitment, actually, and determination, perseverance these dogs have and work as a team. And what I want to say with this, and with other examples we'll use here, is that there is a lot of leadership skills and traits that we can learn from animal behavior, which we don't really focus much. Even in our webinars, we didn't focus much on that. But I think there is many movies, many animal behavior that we could actually start studying and see how are these leadership skills developed more than just having a webinar on leadership. Is there anything nurture out there that we can learn from it? In terms of what, I want first you to have a quick poll if we have time. So we don't want to spend a lot of time there, but what do we see? Kieran, do you have, don't take too much, just I'm curious to see what do they see here. I think there are 2 options,
So,
brown leaves.
Launch the poll, and please go ahead and make your selection. What do you see, brown leaves or others?
Okay. You can close it just to get some ideas. If they had the same experience I had when I saw this.
The number is moving up so fast that I'm curious that what is going to be the last. So I'll just give it another 10 seconds.
That's why I gave it only 2 options. Because I want the first impact. Don't Google, don't do any of that. I can see you.
Okay, guys, I'm going to close it in 5 seconds. So please go ahead and make a selection if you haven't.
Because we are running out of time. We have to think of the webinar too. So
too much time looking at it and making a call. Don't do that. It has to be your first instinct of what you think you see. Okay.
Okay, just close it, Karen.
I'm going to close. And the results are 24% audience see brown leaves and 76 sees otherwise.
Okay, the otherwise people, please comment on the question chat, because I need to know what you see, because I was in those 24% when I first saw that. So I don't know. But that's great that you see out there too, So the point here, though, it's not about what we truly see in there and is that true or not. The point here, I hope some saw this. So as I said, I saw the brown leaves first, but what can we learn from a chameleon? We all know that they change color, skin color very naturally, very frequently. And why is that important, and what can leaders learn from them? So let's start by saying that in Agile teams, there is no distinction between, as I said, leaders and followers, and everyone has to wear the leader hat. So there are always changing requirements. You need to be flexible, you need to be stretching all the time and be ready for that change to come and just go with it. So the flexibility this requires has to become part of each team member's nature. That's why it is important to keep exercising on agility and resilience and not wait for change management to happen when the change happens. So, but what are the challenges that we might face by doing so? So first of all, as I mentioned before, companies have this rush applying agility mindset without addressing the readiness of the leadership skills that they have. So we really need to understand first, A, do we need it? So do we need agility? And I mentioned that before. B, are we ready for it? And if not, C, get executive management buy-in. It is very important that the executive management itself exemplifies and encourages such, because D, we might need to educate the other team members. And if we don't have that buy-in, that's not going to work, especially if we have an overall organizational transformation towards agility. So the principles that are kind of more about when we have here daily cooperation, we have to learn to be available as a leader, as a coach, and avoid micromanaging. So there are a couple of guides out there. We need to be reminding project scope that we can do. If we want to help them, we can just, again, we can just go and touch their how. They need to decide on that. And you can help and create value that way. They have the opportunity to reflect as a team with this reflection times after the sprint is done. Those are specific events that they are always being followed. So, but what I like about that is the fact that with these reflection events, they do also have an event that's specifically for deciding how did they work with one another. And that is something that's different, because they commit to include at least one improvement opportunity in the next backlog. So it really becomes part of the job itself, as it is like producing more functions for the product. The same happens for one improvement opportunity about how did we work with one another. So that is something new that agility mindset brings. Whereas in terms of how, again, we have multiple here, so we will cover very quickly these, but without being repetitive. So we do have a working product, as I said. This is very important to increase the customer feedback. And the first part of the webinar was mentioning this as well. Whereas the self-organizing teams, as I said, leadership role here is shared. Everybody has to wear the leadership hat. Simplicity, this is something that's kind of new for leadership, because in terms of a leader, we think of vision, big picture. Whereas in Agile is keep it simple, start with only what's needed. You don't really need to have the big picture. So that big picture might come even later, because it keeps developing as time goes by. So that's something that as leadership, we need to kind of stretch with ourselves and with the team. Collaboration itself, as I mentioned, face-to-face, it's important, even though that can be like virtual as well. Conley's law actually says that whatever product that you have, it will reflect how your organization suffer from dysfunctional teamwork and collaboration. So if you have that pain point, fix that, otherwise it's always going to impact the product. The sustainability pace. Here again, we have a team that you might say, how can I leave them free? Like, I don't know if they're going to keep up with it. And they do keep up with it. And why that happens, we mentioned before, we are talking about motivated and committed team members here. So if you have those people, you don't need to babysit them. So it works. The role of the leader, after all, is about developing leaders and not like followers. And the other part, which is the best and my favorite for me, is always quality, right? What I like about it here is quality. It's not a milestone checkpoint that check, we had quality, send it to the quality department, that's it. No, it becomes part of the entire product life cycle. And we just said, damning, it's all about quality, belongs to everyone, and we better keep applying it, right? What do we have next here is a stretching point. You can move around, stretch your arms, do whatever. We only have 15 minutes left, and then 2 minutes for something else. So let's focus these 5 minutes for a little bit of exercise to start practicing a little bit this one. So I had this favorite professor of mine, Dr. Tara Swart from MIT. She is a neuroscientist. Also, she teaches neuroscience for leadership there. She recently launched her book, The Source, but what I liked about reading it was the fact that you feel like it's about self-improvement and all of that cool stuff. But in addition to that, she has this exercise about how to create this brain agility, right? To exercise our brain to turn into an agile brain. So if you have a piece of paper, Word document, or whatever, we'll start it here. We're going to continue it later. It's not one of those webinars you just are done with it, you feel smarter, and goodbye, you forget about it tomorrow. So we're just going to increase awareness right now. the actual work you have to do with yourself continues later. So take your time to re-go through the webinar. We record it. It's all going to be on YouTube, and then take action items from it. So for now, if you have a piece of paper or, as I said, a phone or wherever you note something, just do this little exercise. So think about one scenario you had in your life that you acted a certain way or you experienced a certain way. And out of these 6 areas, just distribute percentage-wise on which of those you focus the most. Like give a percentage for each. So you can raise your hands once you are done. That's raising hands button, actually. It's right on the right side. The GoToWebinar section. So once you do that, the next thing you do, basically, you see which ones requires more work. So let's say I'm a very emotional person, so I react by emotions more than just logic itself, even though I like networks and things like that. But I could define myself as more emotionally motivated. So the E there stands for external. So external stuff impacts, and then there are forces that drive you. The I is for internal. So if the logic internally, it's something that I put a little bit lower, I want to decide to work on logic itself. So what the book here is recommending is you have to question yourself, is there any old mindset that makes you behave that way? So what's behind the reaction itself? Not just focus on the reaction. Focus on if there is any mindset, any thinking that makes you, it's holding you back from using it. So once you do that, then change and decide a new behavior. You're going to practice this for about 21 to 66 days for small changes, and a little bit more time for more intense changes, such as emotional intelligence requires more time. But don't do this with just one example here that I just asked you. Once you go home, if you're home later on another day, do this for another 2, 3 more scenarios, because this way you're going to help you evaluate if there is any pattern on the way your brain functions. And once you find that pattern, that's where you're going to focus. Okay, stretching done. You can continue that home. So what we must do as leaders, basically, is helping organizations shift from leading people as puppets to considering people as leaders with the power to lead themselves through network collaboration, as I mentioned before, adaptation to change itself. The scope here is not basically just going out there and turning to change the company right away. You need to build that vision. You need to build these people. You can't just put a bandage basically on it's not letting me move on the pain points of the organization, but they need to stretch. So they need to take the time and focus there. That's the scope there. So we're done with the third part here. As I said, many of these action items will be continuing home. Take your time to evaluate these and reflect on which one is working best for you. We'll try to cover, as I said, for multiple target groups we have here. But what I would like to now do, as if it is a sprint, we have the review event here, and we'll be talking about what we did cover. So let's take a moment to review what we happened to cover here. We emphasize the fact that true leaders should encourage changeability, not just changing and managing change itself, but becoming changeable and resilient to change, and adapt and align system of values and principles and frameworks that actually support this, right? They divorce the traditional command and control approach. So by building leaders is what, at the end of the day, is leadership all about. So in fact, past followers were waiting for leaders' vision. Now we are in an era where shared leadership is actually giving birth to innovation, customized solutions, etc., which add value to the customers beyond their expectations. Now, this is, if this was an actual review event, this is where you actually jump in as customers as well, and you give your feedback. So you can do that, not right now, but you can fill a 1-minute survey we always send during the webinar, and that's what helps us reshape and evaluate the way we're doing these webinars. So that's very important. Do that. You'll get a link afterwards. And this is the time for you. If you have any comments, experiences, questions, I would like Kieran to now have a chance to cover those as well.
Thank you, Sidita. This was fabulous, like amazing. I'm sure I'm getting a lot of comments in the chat box about how valuable
Different experiences, right?
some of
Yeah.
the information has been. Yeah. I have a question from, let me look at the name, Dorentina. She said this has really helped her understand better in agile
Mm-hmm.
leadership and wanted to know how can an institution business determine whether to stick to agile philosophy, because you mentioned earlier that there must be some sort of compatibility, and she would like to
Yes.
understand more on this issue.
Yeah, so that's why I say we covered a lot, and we covered a lot for multiple, trying to cover multiple interests with multiple targets here. But if you go over the recording, we did mention that, so that's why it's important to go over it later. We will also share the PowerPoint presentation. It's always posted on our website under my ASQ. And but the point there was the key change requirements frequently, there is no need to go the agile way. I mean, if things are working for you just fine, that's fine. If you feel you wanna try this out, I would encourage you to start small. Like, I wouldn't just go crazy and fix the whole company right away. You do need to build some momentum. You do need to build some success stories. That way, you will also have it easier to get buy-in from stakeholders or executives, especially if they have never been using it before. So they will ask, why should I even bother, right? So you do need to share some success stories and go with projects that are lower risk, smaller in size, and go from there and see if it's working. If it's not, then there's no need to change.
Okay.
You don't change just for the sake of changing, basically.
Yeah, like I totally believe that if we want to make any change, you got to see where the impact is going to be. And if there's not going to be a positive, sustainable impact, then there's no point in making any sort of changes. Then you're better staying with status quo.
And
So
you
we
did
have,
have, yeah, do you have any other questions?
yeah, I have another question from Igor. Who
Mm-hmm.
produces the already mentioned packages for 1 to 4 week work, as it is very critical for
So,
success?
okay, so this is going back to the Scrum methodology. So the way it works with Scrum methodology framework out there is at the very beginning, I didn't cover all events there to not make you feel like we're having an agile only kind of webinar. We wanted to focus on people skills. But I would quickly mention that there are events. So there is one event where you have the customers in there, you have the Scrum team in there, and they say what they want. They don't go into details. They don't say, so they express their needs. So it's about expressing needs more than just, I want the bag to be brown. I want a bag to be this size. I want a bag that I will be able to carry my lunchbox as well when I go to work. So that's kind of the how mentality. So as a user, there are expressions that some people out there recommend, but I've seen it also being said that we don't use that. So, but one of those is, as a user, I want the product to do this for me, and why. So if you fill those gaps in that sentence, then you'll build these what they are called user stories. The customers here can express them, but they cannot decide on the prioritization. It's the product owner who decides on the prioritization of these, the value that each has, the size of these. So it's not just how risky, whatever, but they talk more about in size and in value and what kind of timeline. So that helps the product owner to prioritize, to do the prioritization. It does not mean that the development team is forced to pick what the product owner say. So he recommends, he guides based, again, linked always to the value that it has for the team, for the customer, sorry. So if there is that clear understanding of the value and the linkage to it, then the Scrum team developers, they decide from the product backlog, which one are they going to use for the next sprint. The sprint can be, as I said, from 1 to 4 weeks. I would recommend, and I've seen this working better for 2 weeks. 1 week is kind of too short. A month is kind of too much. So the development team decides which of these items, A, B, C, D, which are ranked by the product owner, I'm going to pick. They usually pick from the top because those are the ones that have more value in sort of analysis the product owner did, but also they are a bit more detailed as well. As I mentioned, At the beginning, we only plan for next 2-3 sprints, not like the whole product itself. So that's what they do. They build this what's so-called sprint backlog. So that's where they decide to work on. Then within that sprint backlog that they're going to be working on for, let's say, the next 2 weeks, the how, the detailed activities for each of those, let's say training, checking on quality, building or finding suppliers, whatever that is for a certain function or user story. So you might have one user story with 3 activities in there. They decide the how. So this is where the product owner has no ownership to change that. Like he could recommend, if there is a stakeholder, the CEO saying, I need this as a priority, he can go there, hey, we might be fired and we need to do this, but based on the methodology itself, he doesn't have the ownership to force them that. I don't know if I answered that question, but there are multiple sources about Scrum. If you go to scrum.org, if you go to the Scrum guide, actually 20 pages literally, if you read about it, and it can give you a clear understanding what it is.
Yeah,
or just reach out and we'll explain it by phone or something.
Thank you. No, that was a good detailed information. I have one more question from Annie. Do you recommend a good beginner resource, like a book or some sort of course or something that anyone can take?
Yes, there are, as I said, many. The guy outside from this, from the Agile Manifesto. If you just Google Agile Manifesto or send me an email, I can just send it to you, or we can share it to everyone. Agile Manifesto has the 4 values we discussed today. It doesn't have more details. I kind of went in more details, adding the practical part of it. But the values are the ones we listed here. So 4 values, 12 principles. The 12 principles, I grouped them here and I added the leadership stuff in it. So you might not find them this way. But there are 12 principles here. The methodologies are multiple. We only spoke today about Scrum as a framework that implements those. You can find about Scrum in multiple certifications. The one that usually they require a 2-day workshop, which is mandatory before you even get the exam. There is one that does not require a workshop. It's kind of less known. I did that first, which is a PSM1. That's provided by scrum.org. Whereas the Certified Scrum Master, which is something that you hear the most, and I got that too a month ago, that's provided by Scrum Alliance. That does require a 2-day workshop. I think you pay about $1,000-something to get that, and then you get an exam. Udemy courses have many. There's many out there. One I really liked, really followed the exam, the PSM exam. So if you want to send me an email, I can share the one that I went through. But this is one of those roles, if you're planning to make it a career, is one of those certifications that not because you got the certification, you get the job. So there is no real, if you Google around, you'll see there's no junior Scrum Master role. Like no one hires you because you got the certification. So unless you have a company where you have been working as a Scrum Master, it's very hard to get that job. So I would say start small by getting at least involved in projects. It might be just a developer team. Developer doesn't mean a software developer. It means that you are a subject matter expert, part of that execution team of the project. So start that way. If you take more leadership roles, then you get into a Scrum Master role. Then that's the way to go towards that kind of role if you're interested in it.
Oh, that's really good. And just before we wrap up, for just a reminder for all the audience, if you still have any further question or something comes to your mind later on this topic, feel free to reach out to Sidita on her email, siditahasi@gmail.com. And Sidita, thank you so much. It was amazing. And I think I learned a lot from this hour as well, because this is not one of my expertise area at all. So it was great listening to you. And thank you to all the audience, everybody who has taken the time to attend the webinar today. And thanks for the great questions that were brought to make it even better. Today's presentation and recording, few of you mentioned and requested about that. I did reply in the text and the chat box, but just repeating that again, today's presentation and recording will be posted on our My ASQ community. It's also posted on the YouTube channel sometime later this week. And for you who would love to attend the next webinar with us, our next webinar is on December 11th, and the topic is Efficient Leadership, the Future Focus by Nancy Nume. The registration can be done on myasq/home community. And to get automatic notification on future webinars, you can follow our LinkedIn page or sign up for our newsletter through our website. We would highly appreciate if you can also take 1 minute and complete a survey, which will pop up on your screen as soon as you close this webinar. So for those who are attending our over a phone call today, you will receive a follow-up email within an hour. And any of those who are attending have attended for 40 minutes, you will receive a separate email in addition to the follow-up email within this week sometime, and you can use that to claim your credit. So thank you to everyone for taking the time. Say thank you, Sidita. This was really amazing, loved, and I hope we will be able to listen.
I'm sure we'll chat more later.
Yeah, for sure. And we look forward to having everyone on our next webinar on December the 11th. Thank you and have a great month. Take care.
Have a good night.